A shift in mind, the learning organization. This class is really about the field of organizational development. The field of organizational development grew up along with the field of adult learning. So if you've taken some of the MSED courses on adult learning or andragogy, that field grew up in the 20th century, middle to late 20th century, and same with the field of organizational development. And the reason for the field of organizational development was originally around for-profit businesses, primarily, who wanted to increase their productivity. It was about making more money. They wanted their employees to be able to learn more, to be able to be more efficient and make more widgets. And then thereby, if each individual is learning more, then the whole organization perhaps can improve and learn more. Early in the field of organizational development, there was this big question: can an organization learn? That question now seems somewhat naive. Yes, an organization itself, as an entity or as an organism, can actually learn. Since then, the field of organizational development has become much more than about making money. It has actually become more about consciousness and developing human beings, not just businesses themselves. So it's important to understand how quickly and how vastly our world has become more complex. Business complexity has multiplied sixfold since 1955. Some people call this a VUCA world. VUCA standing for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. This is what we're dealing with when we work in an organization. This is a very famous quote from the Senge text, the fifth discipline. As the world becomes more interconnected and business becomes more complex and dynamic, it is no longer sufficient for one person learning for the organization. It is just not possible any longer to figure it out from the top and have everyone else following the orders of the grand strategist. The grand strategist being the CEO, right? So all of this theory was laid down in 1990, was when the fifth discipline was originally published. Yet our organizations still primarily look like this, whether they're for-profit or non-profit or governmental. You have the person at the top who's the grand strategist, and the information flows from the top to the bottom. It's a lot of effort to get information to flow from the bottom to the top. It doesn't happen naturally. But in today's world, knowledge needs to flow quickly all around the organization because we are now in the information age. Knowledge needs to get from this very bottom person to all the levels on top, and it needs to flow laterally. Knowledge is also power. So part of the reasons these systems have not changed is that if knowledge is going to flow from the bottom up, then power also needs to flow from the bottom up. And generally, people who hold power are not in a hurry to give it away. So how do we change this? What is a learning organization? David Cooperrider, one of the more contemporary organizational development experts, says a learning organization is a place where people can thrive and allow their individual and collective greatness to emerge. Now, hear how aspirational this is, much more so than about just making money. So, features of a learning organization. Teams are the engine of learning, where diverse individuals can pool their perspectives, creativity, and knowledge. So again, this is this aspect of knowledge, being able to move around the organization and for everybody being able to understand one another's perspectives and gain their knowledge. A flattened hierarchy or a circular structure for decision making. Decisions do not just come from the top. Individuals and teams with a capacity for complex thinking. So each individual needs to not just be someone who takes orders, but someone who can really think with a lot of complexity and be highly developed as an individual. Yet, this is what our organizations primarily look like after all these years. So how do we change this? Well, we aren't going to change it with the same kind of thinking that we had in the 1950s, that's for sure. No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. I like to turn this quote by Einstein around to the positive version. There is no problem that cannot be solved by a change in consciousness. So what is this change of consciousness that we're after? Senge calls it a shift of mind. We're looking at evolving worldviews and paradigms. So most businesses and organizations are set up, structured, and the thinking is still very much in the industrial age era. This first section of this graph shows parts moving to be thinking in wholes more. A separation. We think of humans as being separated from one another, and now we're starting to think and understand how interconnected each of us are. Certainly COVID-19 helped a lot of people better understand how connected we are to people all around the world. And these bottom rows here are about a change in how we see reality. Instead of thinking that there's one truth and science is going to uncover the one truth, we see reality as constructed by all of us together. Instead of being individualistic, we're moving toward a pluralistic way of thinking and being more culturally responsive and expansive in how we see culture. For those of you who work or who are involved in schools, school districts are not naturally inclined to be learning organizations. This is a quote from a top publisher in education. Now, why is this? Well, let's think about some of the lists from Senge's book, some of the maladies of obsolete systems, and see if these sound like how schools and the whole educational system is run to you. Management by measurement, compliance-based cultures, managing outcomes, right answers versus wrong answers, uniformity. With uniformity, you could think of that as standardization. Predictability and controllability. We certainly don't generally like to have children out of control. Predictability is very important for safety. Excessive competitiveness. And a loss of the whole. I think a loss of the whole we can think of that as a loss of purpose. Forgetting why we're here in the first place. So the laws of the fifth discipline, when we think about changing our states of mind or our consciousness, there are 11 of these laws in chapter 4. The first one is today's problems come from yesterday's solutions. Let's continue with the example of schools or the institution of education. The results that we're getting right now from our educational system are exactly what our solutions from yesterday created. Also, number 11, there is no blame. So that's not that one person is to blame for our results. And it's also that one child who is failing is not to blame. When somebody makes a mistake or fails in a learning organization, we look to the system, not to an individual to blame. So in this class, we'll be really thinking about how to transform individuals and how to transform organizations and make the shift of mind. And it means understanding, developing complexity. So if a person can see things from a single point of view, expanding that to being able to see with more complexity until they see three-dimensionally. And once there's that three-dimensional view, that goes to a whole new level. And I'm sure you've all had the experience of understanding and seeing all of a sudden a blind spot and your whole world opens up and you see things differently than you did before. And at this level 12, people can see not only systems, but they can see systems upon systems. Systems thinking. Yet, this is how most of our organizations are organized. So how do we change this? It's not easy. Implementation tends to be uncomfortable in many ways. We move from clarity to ambiguity. Generally, humans don't really prefer ambiguity. We move from predictability to uncertainty. Instead of size being so important, most corporations are trying to grow and grow and grow. There's more of a need for speed. We talked about going from command and control to empowerment. Instead of avoiding risk, who doesn't want to avoid risk? We have to accept that there is risk, but manage it. So we are all thinking of ourselves as leaders in this class. Whether your status as a leader or not does not matter. It's not a matter of a position. It's a matter of a way of thinking and a way of being. We're developing ourselves as leaders. And we're going to do that with the 5 disciplines: personal mastery, mental models, shared vision, team learning, and systems thinking. Through this course, we're going to look at those week by week in the following order. Weeks 2 through 6, we'll cover each one of these 5 disciplines. For this first week, you will be taking a survey using this tool to examine an organization or a business that you are a part of or that you associate with. If you don't work somewhere right now, you could use Southern Oregon University, for instance, as your organization. And ask yourself, is it a learning organization? You'll take the survey, and Garvin, Edmondson, and Gino, they're out of Harvard, have laid out these 3 building blocks for a learning organization: a supportive learning environment, concrete learning processes, and leadership that reinforces learning. Now, in this class, we will not be looking at concrete learning processes very much. That has to do more with formal learning, or making sure that people learn technically how to do their job better. That'll be covered more in your other classes. And in this class, we will add a 4th aspect of a learning organization, not covered in this particular survey, which is creating structures that create a circular flow of knowledge and power. And that has to do with systems thinking. I am wrapping this talk up with an understanding that this class has a larger purpose, or a theory of change that's going on underneath it. When we think about our world today, it's hard not to think about some giant and expanding problems that we have. Vast inequities, climate change, mental health issues, and on and on. They seem like giant unsolvable problems. I want to return to Einstein's quote: "No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it." If that's true, then that means we need to shift our consciousness, or as Senge puts it, we need a shift in mind. That's what the 5th discipline is all about, and that's what a learning organization is about. So as we move in this class from thinking about our own personal mastery or our own self-awareness, developing our level of consciousness so that we can see more complex realities and think with more complexity and think in terms of systems, we're not only helping ourselves. What ends up happening is we help the organizations that we belong to, and we help our organizations to become places that operate with more complexity, with more harmony, with more efficiency. And as our organizations operate more efficiently and operate with a different consciousness and the different systems, then that helps us to evolve our society to where we can work on solving our larger problems and develop a more integrated awareness, more sustainability, more harmony, and well-being. I realize that's a large vision, and that might sound really ideal. So thank you for being a part of this class. Let's see what's possible.